Somewhere in northern Tanzania, a man has finished his work for the day. It is mid-morning. He has been out since before sunrise, moving through the bush with his bow, reading the ground the way you read a page. He found tracks, followed them for 2 hours, and came back empty-handed. This happens more days than not. He is not worried about it. He drops his bow, finds a patch of shade, and lies down. He will sleep for a while. Then he will sit with the other men and talk. In the evening, when the fire is built, he will listen to a story he has heard before and tell one that everyone already knows the ending to. This is what your ancestors' life looked like. For 300,000 years, we carry an image of ancient life that is almost entirely wrong. In this image, the day is consumed by survival. Every hour is occupied hunting, foraging, building shelter, avoiding predators, treating injuries, starting fires. The life is hard, short, and relentless. There is no time for anything else because survival doesn't leave room for anything else. This image is intuitive. It maps onto how we use the word primitive. The idea that before civilization, life was purely about staying alive from one hour to the next. The anthropological record says otherwise. When researchers began living with the last hunter-gatherer groups still practicing the way of life every human lived for most of human history, they found something that required them to reconsider almost everything. The work was real, the hunting, the gathering, the preparation. But it was not constant. It was not even close to constant. What filled the rest of the time was not the absence of civilization. It was something that civilization forgot to carry forward. And when you look carefully at what it actually did to the brain, the body, the social fabric, the word that keeps appearing is essential. In the 1960s, the anthropologist Richard Lee spent years living with the Kung Bushmen of the Kalahari Desert, tracking their time with the precision of a labor economist. He recorded everything: how long they hunted, how long they gathered, how long they spent preparing food, maintaining tools, building and repairing shelters. He added it all up. The total came to approximately 15 hours per week. Not per day, per week. Lee published his findings in 1968 in a landmark volume called Man the Hunter, and the number changed the way anthropologists understood human history. The Kung were not an exception. Subsequent studies of other hunter-gatherer groups, from the Hadza in Tanzania to the Ache in Paraguay, found similar numbers. The work required to sustain a human life in a functioning forager band was remarkably modest by modern standards. Lee called the Kung the original affluent society. He did not mean that they were wealthy. They owned almost nothing. He meant that they had something modern societies assume is only available at the end of a long career, if at all. They had time, enormous quantities of unscheduled, uncommitted, structureless time. And the question that the number immediately raises, a question Lee spent much of his career exploring, was not whether this was real. The data was real. The question was what they did with it. Because 15 hours of work per week leaves 153 hours for everything else. What your ancestors did with those hours was not nothing. It was, by some accounts, everything. The answer to what filled those hours came from a different researcher, for decades later, working with the same people. Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist at the University of Utah, had been studying the Jew/Hone Bushmen, the same group Richard Lee had lived with since the 1970s. Over those decades, she had collected and translated hundreds of conversations, what the Bushmen talked about, when, and why. In 2014, she published the analysis in PNAS, and the finding was this: daytime talk and nighttime talk were almost entirely different things. During the day, conversation focused on practical matters. Who had seen tracks where, which plants were fruiting, which camps might have food worth visiting. And a large portion of daytime talk was what Wiesner called sanctioning gossip, talk that enforced the social rules, established reputations, kept people honest with each other. The conversation of the daylight hours was the operating system of the camp. After dark, when the fire was built and the work was finished, something shifted. 80% of nighttime talk was stories. Not practical reports, not gossip. Stories, accounts of people in distant places, tales of the ancestors, myths and folktales, accounts of spiritual experiences. The content was imaginative. It reached beyond the immediate situation into something larger. Wiesner concluded that the fire had extended the social day, lengthening the hours available for a kind of conversation that daylight and labor did not permit. And the stories told in that firelight were the mechanism by which moral reasoning, cultural memory, and the sense of belonging to something beyond the immediate camp were transmitted from one generation to the next. She wrote that stories and gifts were the original social media. Think about what those fires were doing. For 400,000 years, the period over which humans are estimated to have been regularly controlling fire, people gathered in the dark around a shared light and told each other stories. They did it every night. The stories were not entertainment in the sense we use that word. They were the container in which everything that mattered was kept and passed on. Who were the ancestors and what did they do? How the world was made and how it should be treated. What happened to the person who broke trust and what was owed to the person who kept it. How to face the things that frightened you. What it meant to die. Your brain was shaped by those fires. The same capacity for narrative, for imagining people who are not present, for feeling something when hearing about events that never happened to you. This is the cognitive architecture that the firelight conversations built and selected for over hundreds of thousands of years. And then consider what replaced the fire. Not the screen, not the phone, those came later. Consider simply what happened when the village became the city and the camp became the apartment and the shared fire at the end of the day became the private door that closes. The stories didn't disappear, but the circle did. There is one more thing the anthropological record reveals about how your ancestors spent their time, and it concerns the people who are easiest to overlook. In 1998, Kristen Hawkes and her colleagues at the University of Utah published a paper in PNAS that asked a question no one had asked precisely. Why do human women live for decades past the end of their reproductive years? No other primate does this. In every other great ape species, females reproduce until near the end of their lives. The long postmenopausal lifespan of human women, sometimes 30 or 40 years of healthy life after the last birth, is biologically unusual. It requires an explanation. The explanation Hawkes found was in the behavior of Hadza grandmothers. The researchers measured foraging output by age and sex. What they found was that postmenopausal women grandmothers were among the most productive foragers in the camp. They brought back more food per day on average than mothers with young children. And that food went disproportionately to their grandchildren. The mechanism worked like this. When a grandmother fed her grandchildren, she freed her daughter to have another baby sooner. The grandmother's foraging effectively subsidized the next generation's reproduction. Over evolutionary time, grandmothers who lived longer and worked harder had more surviving grandchildren. The long human lifespan was, in part, built by old women who kept showing up. What looked like surplus time, postmenopausal life in an era without pensions or retirement plans, was, in biological terms, one of the most productive investments the species ever made. We made trades. Real ones with real gains on both sides. Vaccines, surgery, antibiotics, clean water, food that does not depend on the luck of the hunt. Fewer children dying before they learn to walk. Lives that last twice as long as any forager could expect. Nobody is suggesting we go back. But the trades were not free, and the costs are not always named. You inherited the body that lived around those fires. The same nervous system, with the same requirements for sunlight and physical movement and face-to-face conversation and unstructured time that serves no productive purpose. The body that was built to work 15 hours a week and spend the rest in stories and proximity and rest. That body is sitting somewhere right now, scheduled and monitored and always connected. It still knows what it was made for. It has not forgotten the fire.